County again, and to see the incredible things that are happening here at school. And in particular, to be talking about today, I'm joined by Lieutenant Governor Rebecca Kleefisch and Attorney General Brad Schimel. And the focal point of our visit today is not only to see the amazing things that are happening here, but to reinforce our commitment to school safety. Last week I called a special session calling for a series of items, the primary focus being $100 million being set aside for school safety grants that will be administered through an office set up in the Department of Justice. The idea being that Department of Public Instruction, the CSAs, and the school districts work on curriculum and education. From a public safety standpoint, we wanted people who are directly trained in that, working with our school officials across the state. These will be for grants that will be solely for public safety, and they'll be without a specific mandate other than they have to be for public safety. They can be in any number of areas, from improvements and upgrades in physical property at school buildings across the state, as well as for things like staff for school safety officers or other things like that. And the focal point why we're here together, the three of us, even though we all work together well, we typically are in three different directions most days around the state, is to draw attention to not only the special session call, but to our hopes that the legislature will pass that this week. The good news is we believe after the announcement last week, there was broad support in both the Assembly and the Senate. One of the issues left remaining is how will it pass? Is it in a special session? Is it in a regular session, or how might it be worked out? I think not only for the three of us, but for people across the state, our focal point is we don't care how it passes, it's just got to pass. That we want to make sure, just like we did after 9/11 as a country, when, even though it was a bit inconvenient at the time, we made as a country a decision that we were going to change the way we go through our airports and onto our airplanes to ensure safety there. And today, even though it was inconvenient back then, I think it's pretty safe to say that people all across the country feel safe when they're going onto an airplane. When we screen for that, we screen for everything from firearms to explosives to knives and other weapons. We don't just target one particular area. And again, our hope would be here is that these grants would be made available. The largest of any plan, not only in the state, but one of the largest plans of any state in the nation would be in the same way, that it's not just singling out one particular threat, that this would be made available for school districts to focus on making sure their schools are safe from any threat possible. And whether it's firearms, whether it's explosives, as we've seen with bomb threats, or whether it's through some other weapon, a knife or some other weapon along the way. And we just want to make sure that every student, every teacher, every parent, every administrator, every staff member in our schools should feel absolutely safe. The only thing kids should have to worry about is making sure their homework's done. And we want to make sure that all the rest, that we're helping our school districts at the local level decide what's best to make sure the kids are safe. So invite Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General to say a few things.
Sure. Our message today across the state is really simple. We need our legislators to pass this school safety package. I stand with two other parents. Many of you at home are parents, and you can only protect your children for so long. At some point, they get on a bus and they go to a building where you hope they'll be just as well protected as they are in their own home. But when you see the news or you get a phone call about something like the Florida shooting, you start to question everything. And that's what happened to me on that day that everybody saw the news. I called the governor right away, and he felt the same way. I called Brad right after that, and he felt the exact same way. And it was right then, in that moment, that these men said, we need to do something, and we need to do it quickly so that our children are safe, that they're protected, that their moms and dads can rest assured that their little ones are going to be fine when they go to school. This school safety package accomplishes those things. To hear more about the details, Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you. This won't be the last conversation we have in Wisconsin or across America about school safety, but this is an opportunity to find some things that we can make a real difference to keep our kids safer and their teachers and staff at schools safer quickly, and have this in place by the start of the next school year. These bills will help us to make schools a less attractive target for violence and also a less vulnerable target. And those are the things we're after to make our kids and the people in our schools safer every day. This is something that should make sense to everyone. We're confident will get passed, and these are to be able to use $100 million in grants to school districts throughout the state to put in place either physical systems to make their schools more difficult to get into from an intruder, or to get trained staff here, like former police officers or current police officers who can be in the school to provide safety. Whatever those things might be, focusing on the mental health aspects that are involved in so many of these mass shooting incidents. Putting all those things together, this package of bills does that in a way that we can move forward on the things we have consensus on right now.
Great. And that, just to summarize on this as well, we've got $100 million that'll go out in grants that'll be administered. The hope being, timing-wise, appreciate the lawmakers who are here. We're optimistic that they'll get done this week. In that regard, the Department of Justice can get working on this right away and have these grants out. So by the time kids here and across the state go back to school in the fall, those grants will be administered, and work will already have been done, in many cases probably over the summer, so to further support safety in our schools. It's not only the $100 million though, excuse me, it's a series of other things. It's training and professional support. It's working on things like trauma-informed care and other initiatives out there. It's really even mandatory reporting. Our schools already have some provisions, as do other professionals, for mandatory reporting for things like child abuse and other things like that. This would include threats against schools or other students. This is just a way for us to bring this all together to make sure we've got a comprehensive package. We think it focuses on safety within our schools. It's something that can get done this week. I also want to thank the Wisconsin Association of School Boards that worked with us, the Wisconsin Association of School Safety Officers, who, by the way, actually have a comprehensive 25-point plan they put out several years ago that schools can go through to see. Some cost money, others do not, to make sure that they're safe, and law enforcement and others from across the state who helped us put this package together. With that, we'll take questions.
Governor, how do you guys plan to split up that money?
Well, it'll be through a process, again, through the Department of Justice. That's why they created a new office. There'll be staff there to work on not only administering the grants, but actually work with school districts across the state to help them assess that. Again, the Association of School Safety Officers has a comprehensive plan, 25 points of things that schools should look through. That's a good place to start, to say where are we meeting the mark on those, and to highlight if there's deficiencies, to look at ways that grant dollars could be used. But this will be a process where the sole focus is going to be on safety. That's why we didn't do it through the Department of Public Instruction. Their focus, appropriately so, is on education and instructional assistance. This would be purely on safety.
Governor, should every school in the state, would it be better if every school in the state had a school resource officer or school safety officer presence within the schools, whether armed or unarmed?
Well, it'll depend on the school district. Some, for example, my kids went to Wauwatosa Public Schools. They had officers there for years. So even when you look at, if you just took this money and distributed it through every public school in the state, it would be about $115 per student. But it's actually going to probably be more than that because metropolitan Milwaukee area schools, many of them, like the ones my kids went to in Wauwatosa, or particularly in the city of Milwaukee, many of their high schools, for example, already have police officers there in larger numbers than just one or two. They have metal detectors, they have secure doors. That works for them where they have a daily threat, which is the reason they've made those decisions in the past. Other school districts are going to have different needs and different ways of assessing that. So for us, this is not a mandate, it's not a dictate, but it is providing resources to help for districts that want to do, whether it's the officer, staffing changes, or even just training, as well as physical plant changes.
Will there be,
Our Department of School Safety at DOJ will work with law enforcement in the communities and school districts to assess what are the best practices, what things would this school district like to put in place. And that may mean for some school resource officers, for others it may mean hardening the physical structure, putting locks on classroom doors that can be utilized easily in the event of an emergency, putting in place communication systems so that you can communicate if there's a problem. We'll let the school districts, working with them to consult on the best practices, make that decision for themselves about what they'll seek grant money for.
will there be a maximum on how many grants a school district can apply for?
No, from our standpoint, what we're trying to do, and again, why we've got an office set up, we're not just divvying it up, is really to have teams in place. Again, the hope being not only work with individual school districts, but continue the work we've had with the Wisconsin Association of School Boards, and working with the Wisconsin Association of School Safety Administrators, just because we want to make sure that every school is safe, that in every part of the state. It's why even looking at this as opposed to just revenue changes, because some school districts might approve them, others may not. We want to make sure that every district has access to these dollars.
Why not push for a universal background check, Bill, on guns to make sure that guns don't end up in the wrong hands and perhaps prevent more school attacks?
Well, because from this standpoint, similar to the 9/11 example, where we don't just screen at airports for explosives, which was the predominant cause of what was done during the 9/11 activities, they screen for everything: firearms, weapons, knives, you name it. And we all know the long list of stuff you can't bring on a plane, as well as explosive. The same thing being true here. We don't want to just limit it to just looking at how do you keep schools safe from firearms, but how do you, we just had a bomb threat a couple weeks ago in metropolitan Milwaukee. We've had them elsewhere. On a daily basis, particularly in some of our larger school districts, they have threats and concerns because of other weapons out there. To us, it should be something we address across the board to make sure that our schools are safe going forward, and we can have debates and discussions about some of these other issues that go beyond schools in the future. But right now, for us to get this through in the last few days of the legislative session, we want something that has a broad consensus. We think this does. I think the key why we're out here today drawing attention to it is not that we don't think people are for it. We just want to make sure it gets through. And oftentimes in the waning days of the legislative session, there's sometimes debate about the process. We want to make sure the process isn't a barrier to getting this passed.
If Florida
Two more, please.
if Florida can pass some kind of restriction on guns, waiting periods, et cetera, why can't Wisconsin do that to make everyone safer?
Well, people have said for years we should have a prohibition about anyone who is a minor committed a crime that would have been a felony as an adult from possessing a firearm, or we should be able to change the law to make sure that someone who'd been mentally ill and been committed with a court order shouldn't have access to a firearm. I agree with that. I wrote that law 25 years ago. That's the law in the state of Wisconsin, unlike in Florida or elsewhere. So I'm all for reasonable things. I've made those changes in the past, but for us to do that right now, we need to focus on school safety, because we've got this window of opportunity to get things done before the legislative session is done in advance of the next school year, and that's really what our focus is.
Do you have any kind of backup plan in the event that something like this wouldn't get through? I mean, what's your confidence level that the Assembly will actually pass this?
Well, I think it's very high. I talked to the Speaker, the Majority Leader. I've talked to other legislative leaders. I think there's broad-based support for doing this. The question is just the format. How do they best do that? And I just want to reinforce what I hear across the state with the three of us, and I'm assuming a lot of lawmakers and others here people say, I don't care how you do it. I don't care whether it's special session, extraordinary session, regular legislative session, whatever route you choose, I'm okay with, just get it done. For us, the difference in Wisconsin is we actually get things done, unlike a lot of the frustration people have had for years, not just recently with Washington, where they can't seem to get things done, is we get things done here in Wisconsin. It's why we just, last week I signed the sparsity aid change and the change for low revenue districts. It's why a couple weeks ago in Toma, we signed the change that helps lower insurance premiums for farmers and small business owners and increase health care choices and stability. It's why we just passed major welfare reform. That's why we're going to finish off this legislative session with a number of other ones, because we actually get things done. And so I guess our call, our plea is that we know people support this in the legislature. We know it'll probably have, as those other bills I mentioned, many of them had bipartisan support. We just want to make sure it doesn't get hung up in the process.
Last one,
did.
please.
Grants aren't a permanent solution, so how can voters know, especially with the upcoming election, that this money won't decrease or go away after the election?
Yeah, well, in the last, long before this year, in the last budget, two things. One, we put more actual dollars into public education than ever before, $11.5 billion. That's an extra $200 for every school, for every student in every district in the part of the state of, all over the state of Wisconsin. An extra $204 this coming school year on top of that. But probably equally, if not more important on this issue, and that was over the last 2 years, we've held listening sessions in this and every other county in the state. And what we heard from, and the listening sessions were not just on education, they were on everything. But for the principals, superintendents, teachers, and others who were there in particular, one of the big takeaways I took from those listening sessions was they were telling me that while the mental health dollars we put into the state budget 4 years ago, the most in 25 years for counties, was helpful, that by the time a student gets to the county level, it's gone too far. And so in this last budget I signed last summer, we put millions of new dollars into mental health grants and grants for counselors, school districts across the state. Those are just coming online now. As we look to the next budget, we'll look for ways to enhance that, assuming those grants are used across the state of Wisconsin. And again, because of our reforms, we're able to do that because the state's in a position where we can afford having a larger than expected surplus yet again to make those critical investments, not only in education, but into mental health and now into school safety.
Do you mind if I ask one more quick one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll keep it quick. Are you familiar with AB 825, Sarah's law? It's being voted on before it passed the Assembly, going in front of the Senate tomorrow, protecting guardian ad litem and other
Oh, yeah,
types
it's
of
the one in the
attorneys.
Wausau case, yeah, I don't remember the number.
Exactly, yep. If that gets to your desk, do you plan to sign it?
Absolutely. In fact, Jerry Petrowski asked me about signing it somewhere in the Wausau area, and assuming it gets through the Senate, which I have every reason to believe I think it would be appropriate. In fact, just saw the big first run over the weekend, drawing attention to that. I think it would be appropriate to have some of the same people who are involved in that be a part of the bill signing.
All right,
Governor.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.